Hey everybody. So we're going to take some time here in this video to go over the short story that we read for homework last week, which was The Lottery by Shirley Jackson, which is a classic. So let's go ahead and pull up the PowerPoint and get started on that. Okay. So once again, we're going to talk about this story in terms of the literary elements that we've been focusing on every week so far. So we're going to look at structure, point of view, setting and atmosphere and imagery and symbolism, and how all of those pieces sort of work together to help us understand the themes within the story. But first, a brief summary. All right, so story begins sort of in a very typical manner. Narrator reveals some basic details about the setting. It seems like we're in a very average town, could be located anywhere in the United States. Based on some of the details, I do sort of get the feeling that it's more Midwest, but honestly, even that is not necessarily a definite. It really could be kind of anywhere. The townspeople are gathering for something they call the lottery. So they chat about very mundane things as they're gathering in the middle of town, waiting for those who are running a few minutes late. The kids are kind of just off playing around, just waiting. And it just seems like whatever this lottery is, it's just a very typical part of their community life. We do find out that it only happens once a year. But even still, you think that something that happened once a year, there'd be a lot of fanfare and people would be a little more excited. But it just seems like sort of an average response to this lottery day. And they're all just gathering around and, chit-chatting, just waiting for the event to start. We know it's conducted by a well-known member of the community, a well-respected man. It's a town tradition. It's been going on each year for as long as anyone can remember. It seems like everybody who is currently living in this town, none of them were alive when the lottery began. So it has gone back generations and generations. No one. All we really find out is that it ensures whatever this lottery is about, it helps ensure that the village, that the town has a good harvest season, good crops that year. And we know that a black box is somehow involved, right? So as the lottery begins, we learn that each family in the town has to draw a piece of paper from the black box. And we also learned that only the head of household can draw, which means either the husband or the oldest son if the father is not available. And then I'm sure there's, enough, like you go on down, like, okay, well, if the father's not available, it goes to the oldest son. If the oldest son isn't available, then it goes to the next oldest son. What if there are no more sons? I'm sure there's like a, a hierarchy that they follow to make sure that the correct person draws for the family each year. But in our story, it's mostly all of the husbands that are drawing. They draw a piece of paper from the black box. And once each family has drawn their slip of paper, everyone looks to see if their family has the first winning slip. All right. We learned that this year, the Hutchinson family has received the first winning slip. At that time, each member of the Hutchinson family, all of them, every member, draws another slip from the black box. They each unfold their slip to see who has received the ultimate winning slip, which is the slip with the black spot on it. So we've got a black box filled with all these pieces of paper, right? In the first round of the lottery, the head of household from every family draws one slip of paper from the black box. Those slips of paper are to determine which family is up for the lottery. Once they've determined that, then that family has to each draw a piece of paper from the black box. This year, it's the Hutchinson family. So each of the Hutchinson family members draws a piece of paper from the smallest, the youngest to the oldest. Age does not matter. Every person in that family is eligible to draw a piece of paper and potentially win the lottery that year, right? It's the piece of paper with the black spot on it. So whichever family member draws that piece of paper with the black spot on it, they are the winner of that year's lottery. We find out that it is Tessie, the wife and mother of the Hutchinson family, who has drawn the piece of paper with the black spot. So this makes Tessie the winner of this year's lottery, right? And I keep saying winner with air quotes because we know it, as soon as it's established that it's Tessie, it's very quick what happens next. It's definitely not a lottery you want to win, because as soon as everyone realizes that Tessie's the winner, every person in the town, young and old, friends and family, every person has to participate by throwing rocks at Tessie, presumably stoning her to death, because it is tradition, after all. So if you were, it's very possible that some of you have either already read this story in high school possibly, or if you've taken English classes at any other college. It's possible you may have also seen a movie version. There's a couple of the lottery. Like I said, it's a classic. It gets read a lot. But if this was your first time reading it, I imagine you were either confused at the end or completely shocked and maybe sort of disgusted at the end. And if you were confused, my guess is because your brain really didn't want to admit what you just read was true, that that's really what was happening in this story, that it's just this really mundane, innocuous, average day that ends with this woman being stoned to death by everyone in her town, including her own family members. And that's not something that we expect, not something we necessarily want to think about. So if you were confused, it might in part be because your mind just didn't even go there. Like, that's not even, why would you even think that that's what was happening, that they were stoning her to death, right? Because we don't get confirmation that she is dead, but that is what we are supposed to assume, that is what this lottery is all about, is figuring out which person in the town will be the sacrifice that year. And the sacrifice, as far as anyone knows anyway, as far as anyone can remember, the whole sacrifice is made to ensure a good harvest that year, good crops. Now, again, the lottery's gone on for so many generations. How do we really know? Interesting and horrifying. Let's take a look at those literary elements and see what's going on in each area, and if we can draw any sort of themes from this story, as shocking as it is. So the structure of this story is very standard. There is really, for the most part anyway. All right, so we have our introduction, our point of attack, which would be what we would call it in dramatic structure. But this is our introduction and our exposition. Happens through paragraphs 1 through 18. It sets the scene, provides some background information about the lottery, even though that information is limited. And the reason that it's limited is to help build the suspense, right? So it's like we get a little bit of information, just a little tease, but not enough to fully understand what's going on. Then we get our rising action, which is the longest section of the story, that rising action leading to the climax. She really builds the suspense here. Paragraphs 19 through 70. This is where the families, this is when once the lottery officially begins and the families begin drawing their pieces of paper from the black box. She draws that out. Then we get the climax, which is 2 paragraphs, paragraphs 71 and 72. Very short paragraph. Tessie's slip of paper has the black spot, right? Because it's like, that's what we're building to. Who's going to win the lottery? Who's going to win the lottery? Who's going to win it? Oh, it's Tessie. Then we get our falling action, paragraphs 73 through 78. Everyone quickly gathers their stones so they can conclude the lottery and get back to work, get back to their daily life. So it's like all of this suspense is built, you know, trying to figure out who the winner is. And when they finally know who the winner is, then it's all very quick and rushed because they just want to get it over with and go back to their homes or back to their jobs, right? It's crazy. And then we have our denouement, which is, you know, sort of like the resolution, tying up all the loose ends, sort of. It's paragraph 79. That's it. The shortest section. The townspeople descend upon Tessie. That's it. It is, you know, a lot of suspense building within the structure of this story. The suspense coming straight from the structural element is how long she spends on the rising action. And there is something to be said for how quickly the climax, falling action, and denouement happen. Like it's, again, it's like we build and build and build and build and build, and then whoop, we're done, right? So it's like a roller coaster that has the longest hill ever. And we're okay with that most of the time because we know that once we get to the top of that hill and the roller coaster then starts to go back down, you know, that's the best part. And that's where, you know, there's usually more to come after that. But this is like a roller coaster that has a really high hill, but then we don't really get much of a drop afterwards. Or if we, you know, we get the drop, but then it's over. There's nothing else after, after that climax. It's very quick. It's because she spends so much time building the suspense for us with limited information, limited explanation. All right. So another thing that she uses within the structure of the story is foreshadowing, right? So she uses very small details to foreshadow what's to come, little clues that, you know, along the way, the first time we're reading it, we don't even realize they are clues. And if you remember, we talked about how that can happen with foreshadowing. It's not until after you have finished reading the piece that you then come to understand that the author did give us clues along the way. We just didn't know they were clues. So the first clue that she gives us in the beginning of the story is she references all of the children who are there running around playing, right, as everyone's waiting for the townspeople to gather. The children, some of them, especially the little ones, are gathering stones and putting them in their pockets, right? You know, because obviously the little ones, they have to participate. Once the winner is announced, every single person in the town must participate in the stoning. And obviously these little ones, they're only going to be able to pick up like pebbles and, you know, small rocks. They're not going to be able to pick up big boulders or, you know, anything substantial, but they have to participate. So they're gathering their little rocks and putting them in their pockets. All right, so the next sort of clue that she gives us is that Tessie is the one who arrives late, right? They're waiting on her. So right away, our attention is drawn to Tessie, right? There's a reason why our focus is shifted to Tessie. Mr. Summers even says to Tessie, Mr. Summers, who runs it, thought we were going to have to get on without you, which is exactly what her family has to do once the lottery is over. They have to get on without her. The Watson boy is asked if he's drawing for his mother. Remember, because it's supposed to be the head of household who draws, the husband / father, right? The Watson boy asks if he is drawing for his mother. Why would he be drawing and why would he be pulling the slip of paper out instead of his father? Unless maybe his father has already won a previous lottery. There could be other reasons why someone would die, of course. We can't know for sure, but it is sort of a little clue that, pay attention to whose family members are missing, who are no longer with us. That was a little clue there that that this father / husband is no longer with his family. It also clues us into sort of that tradition, that hierarchy, that regardless of why the husband is no longer with his family, why doesn't the wife then draw the piece of paper? Why is the boy asking if he's supposed to do it? All right, so little clues there, a little foreshadowing along the way built into the structure of the story. All right, let's move on to point of view. Because the point of view in this story also builds suspense. We have a third person objective narrator here, which honestly does not happen that often in literature. Because remember, the third person objective is the narrator who is not a character in the story, does not take part in the action, and has no access to any of the character's thoughts and feelings. So most of the time in literature, we're going to have access to at least one character's thoughts and feelings, right? We're either going to have a first person narrator or a limited omniscient narrator. We're going to know at least what one person is thinking. Not this story. We don't know what anyone is thinking or feeling. The dialogue sort of clues us in to some of the feelings and thoughts happening. We certainly get a feel for how Tessie feels once she realizes her slip of paper has the black spot on it. But that's just through her words. We do not have a narrator who is providing us with how these characters are thinking and feeling. The narrator is very detached. And this allows the suspense to build because we don't know what they're thinking about, which means we don't really know what the lottery is about. We don't really know what's about to happen. We could maybe start to figure it out if we had access to at least one character's thoughts. But we don't. Right? All we get are the words and actions that the narrator is recording and reporting to us. The tone is very detached, very calm, and it remains detached and calm even when the normalcy of this town descends into abject horror. Once they know Tessie's the winner and everything else happens very quickly before, as the story comes to an end, the narrator it's still very objective, very detached, very calm, and it's a little disconcerting for us. It's a very uncomfortable feeling that this awful thing is happening, unbelievable, crazy thing is happening, and yet our narrator is still just reporting the facts. And I think that we can sort of take from that that the townspeople are also very calm and detached, right? as they gather, they're just chit-chatting, shooting the breeze. They don't seem, I mean, there might be a little bit of nervous energy in the air, but for the most part, they don't seem terribly upset at what they're about to experience. It's just a normal, accepted part of their life. They don't seem terribly upset when they have to kill Tessie. It's just part of their life, their traditions in this town. So the narrator's tone sort of clues us into what we're supposed to see within this town, that they are very detached as well. It makes me wonder how they were behaving in their homes the morning of the lottery. Were they talking about it amongst their family members? Were they thinking about it? Was there anything in the air? Like if you were to walk into their homes, was there any kind of tension, any anxiety, any fear that could be felt or observed prior to them going out for the lottery? How did they react when they returned home? How did Tessie's family react first and foremost? Are they allowed to grieve for her? Are they allowed to be upset? Do they even think to feel upset? Or is it just a detached, moment? It's just what we do. We know, we all know it could be us every year. It's that detached tone. I think we are supposed to, it's not just that it creates the suspense and builds the suspense and keeps us in the dark even longer until that moment when they start, descending upon her with the stones. It's like, it also, I think, is a reflection of the townspeople, or at least we're supposed to question if it is a reflection of the townspeople, because there's a lot left unanswered about this story. A lot. All right, so let's look at the setting and the atmosphere. So the setting described in the first few paragraphs seems like it could be anywhere in the USA, any town USA. Seems like a very average town, could be anywhere, which then sort of makes you wonder, like, okay, the horrors of this town, this awful thing that they do every year, could happen anywhere. Are we all susceptible to this? Are any of our communities guilty of anything like this? And not necessarily killing someone as a sacrifice for a good harvest, but simply, being swept up in traditions that we don't necessarily remember or understand or agree with, right? Because it seems like she's trying to say this could really honestly happen anywhere. The atmosphere that's created, the mood, the vibe, almost seems very lovely and nice at first, a very nice summer day. But that narrator's detached tone sort of keeps us at a distance, right? We get some suspense built. It is definitely a suspenseful atmosphere because the narrator's tone keeps us at a distance, and the lack of information keeps us at a distance, starts to build suspense. The black box starts to build suspense because there's a lot of mystery and intrigue about this black box. The lottery draw itself deepens the suspense, especially considering it is the longest part of the story. So the structure here helps create that atmosphere. So, Tessie's protests then mark a very sharp shift. We go from suspense, where we've been pretty much from the beginning of the story, to fear, right? And then the final paragraph makes the final shift from fear to like shock and horror. But don't forget, the narrator's the point of view and tone remain very detached, even through all of that suspense building, that shift to fear, and that final shift to like shock and abject horror. That narrator still stays detached. So we have our setting, which we need to really, even though we don't know much about it, what we do know about it, we need to think about how that's what the author is trying to say with that setting, where this story takes place. And it seems like what they're really trying to get through to us is that, I'm not going to give you any specific details because I want you to think about how this could happen anywhere, how we can let ourselves get caught up in what is just accepted as normal. The atmosphere is actually created between the structure and the point of view in the story. So how long it takes to build the suspense, that rising action, and then how quickly the climax, the falling action in the denouement happens. That helps build the suspense and then make those quick turns into fear and shock and horror. The point of view helps with that because it keeps us very detached and intrigued, because we don't really know what's happening. So it's interesting here that most of the time an atmosphere is created by the actual setting, the location, and sort of the action and dialogue of the characters. But for this story, the atmosphere is really more created by the structure and the point of view. Kind of cool. The ending is not, but the techniques are cool. All right, so let's take a look at the imagery used in the story. We've got our setting. So we get some imagery there when in the first few paragraphs where we get some descriptions of how it's a beautiful summer day. We get some description of the innocence of the children playing. Some imagery in the third paragraph where the families start to gather and things seem perfectly normal. We get a lot of imagery from the black box. The first mention of it is in the fourth paragraph. In the fifth paragraph, we learn that the box is part of the tradition, but it's so worn and shabby, but no one wants to upset the transition by replacing the old box with a new one. They don't want to do that. The sixth paragraph, where the box is stored during the year, what gets put in the box. There's a lot of focus placed on that black box fairly early in the story. And then we get some bits of imagery once we find out who the winner is. So paragraph 74, a lot of attention paid to the stones. Note that Mrs. Delacroix selected a stone so large she had to pick it up with both hands. Like she is making sure that her participation in this lottery is for real. In paragraph 75, Mrs. Dunbar had small stones in both hands. Paragraph 76, even the children have stones and pebbles. Paragraph 77, Tessie held her hands out desperately as the villagers moved in on her. A stone hit her on the side of the head. Paragraph 78, this old man Warner hurrying everyone up. Like, let's get this done. Steve Adams and Mrs. Graves lead the crowd. And then 79, the ending, why the sudden switch from Tessie's first name to maiden name, or married name. It isn't fair, it isn't right, Mrs. Hutchinson screamed, and then they were upon her. So we do get some bits of imagery throughout that section, the climax, the falling action, and the denouement. And notice that nearly all of the imagery in those short sections are focused on the stones. So I won't say necessarily that the imagery within this story is plentiful or that it is poetic necessarily. I don't want to say that the imagery doesn't matter, because that's not what I'm trying to say. It's just not as prominent as it is in other stories. But what little bits of imagery we get, again, it's to focus our attention on something very specific, to focus on the setting. She really wants us to think about where this story is taking place and how these people are behaving in that setting. The black box. Obviously, she wants to draw our attention to that. We will look a little closer at the black box here in just a few minutes. And she wants us to focus on those rocks. Who's picking them up? What kind of rocks they're picking up? You know, and then Tessie's reaction, how quickly they want to get it over with. And then that switch from Tessie's first name to her married name as they are descending upon her to finish the job and kill her. We're going to look at these different things. We've kind of already looked at setting, but we're going to look at the black box, and we're going to kind of talk about the imagery and the rocks and things that are happening there in the last few sections of the story as well, because her focus on those very specific elements with the imagery is because some of these turn into symbols. First, let's though talk about some motifs, because these also, you know, remember a motif is sort of a repeated image, right? We get a lot of attention paid to families and family units. They're kind of all scattered at first, but once the lottery begins, each family comes together. And the family unit seems to be of great importance to this town, especially on lottery day, right? The family units, I think what we're supposed to assume as we see them come together and stick together, and how the whole lottery is based on the family unit, that the family unit seems very strong until the winner is revealed. Because then the bonds of family don't matter at all. It's a very weird contrast between how strong the family unit seems to be, how important it seems to be, and yet how easily it can be discarded once the winner is chosen. A lot of focus, a lot of different imagery repeated involving the families. We also have some repeated references to rules, right? We know the lottery is held on the same date each year. We know men are in charge of the lottery. We know that some of the rules and traditions have been foregone, meaning they don't necessarily stick to every single aspect of how the lottery was originally conducted. We know there's a lot of pomp and circumstance to begin the lottery. It seems like that is the same every year. Only men draw slips of papers in the first round. If they're unable to be present, a grown son will draw. If there's no grown sons, the wife will draw. You know, the older generation helps ensure that the tradition persists. But the question is, why have some of the rules been dismissed, but others remain? Why are there some elements of the older lottery that they have agreed to either just get rid of or change in some way, but yet there are other elements of this tradition that they are adamant never get changed? And we don't get any answers to that. But I think we're simply supposed to question it. So it's very, very strange, but we get these repeated references throughout the story, repeated references to family units, repeated references to rules where they apply to traditions. All right, so let's take a look at the symbols. Obviously, I think we all probably realize that the black box is a symbol. There's just way too much attention paid to this little black box throughout the story. And then once we realize the role that the black box plays in the lottery, we definitely know it's an important piece of the story. All right, so the box is falling apart, but no one is willing to use a new box or any kind of different box. It's just the box represents tradition and should be left unchanged. So they have, again, they have sort of let go of some of the rules and proceedings for the lottery. But what is it about this black box? Why do they refuse to use a new one? Or to, like, why do they feel so strongly that this black box should be left unchanged? Well, the box is what contains the family names. They used to be written on wood chips, but now paper is used. That tells you how long this has been going on and how long that black box has been around. Why are they so okay with changing other elements, but not this black box? Why should they continue to fold the lottery in the first place? What is it about this black box that keeps them tied to this tradition? The family names go in it. That's what they draw from. It is the vessel of the lottery. Are they afraid that by changing that major component of the lottery, that that the sacrifice will stop working, that they won't continue to have good crops every year? Are they afraid that the lottery is more than just a sacrifice for a good harvest? Is there even more superstition built into this lottery where families, people now might start to worry that if they get rid of the black box that the family's names are held in, that then bad things will start happening to their families? So not just that they won't get a good crop that year, but that everything else will go to hell also. Again, we don't necessarily have answers. We just have questions. And I think that's a huge part of this story, is not necessarily to give us answers, but to make us question. And one of the biggest questions around this black box is, our question as the reader is, why don't they question it? Where are their questions? The characters in this story, the people of this town, where are their questions? Seems like there should be a lot of questions, a lot of pushback, a lot of disagreements going on surrounding this lottery. The lottery itself is a symbol, right? It is an event that happens in this town, but for us, it is a symbol. It is a tradition that has been passed down through generations. We hear the phrase, lottery in June, corn be heavy soon. So if they hold the lottery in June every year, that they will have good crops, a good harvest. Again, do we know if that's why it started, if that's what its purpose was in the first place? I don't know. I mean, maybe. Or if that's just something that then got attributed to the lottery. Like, maybe that's the reason we do this. Oh, yeah, you're right. Every year after we do the lottery, we get a really good crop. Oh, that must be the reason why we do it every year. I don't know. But no one questions it. Everyone is loyal, and their blind loyalty, this just blindly following this tradition, results in murder that they all take part in. You gotta just hope that, maybe someday someone, probably from one of the younger generations, will speak up and refuse to follow the fold. If you've watched one of the movie versions, the one with oh gosh, what's her name? Carrie Russell, and Dan Cortez. If you've watched that version from the 90s, they do try to shape it. Like, it is not a direct, it is inspired by this short story. But obviously, if you've seen that movie and now read the story, you know that they changed some things in that movie. Because in the movie, they do try to question it and, defy. But not in the actual story. In the actual story, everyone follows along. No one questions it. It's just blind loyalty, and maybe someone needs to stand up and say, hey, this doesn't seem right. Are you sure we need to keep doing this? But would it work? Probably not. Let's look at our themes. We looked at our structure, our point of view, the setting and atmosphere, and the imagery and symbolism. And I think one theme that comes out of this has to do with family. Looking at family bonds. And again, we're sort of led to feel like family units are super important in this town. Family bonds are strong, and they are especially important on lottery day, since every family has to gather together, and then each head of household draws a piece of paper from the black box. But on lottery day, those family bonds also become socially important, right? The emotional bonds are sort of placed on hold, because it's not just the other townspeople who throw the stones. The winner's family members have to as well. Tessie's husband and children had to throw stones at her to help kill her. And so it leaves you wondering what happens to these family members afterwards. I kind of mentioned this earlier, like how if the family bond seems that strong, that important in the beginning, and yet the family members can so easily turn on one of their own if needed. What happens to those family members afterwards? Do they go back to being a strong unit again? Or is it like, once one of your own has fallen victim to the lottery, those bonds aren't as strong anymore? Does the family unit fall apart? I would say our only clue to the answer for that question is just based on what we can observe from the other townspeople. We have to assume that many of them have lost a family member to the lottery. It doesn't seem like it's a ginormous town. And they do this every year. So there's probably families who were present that have lost someone. They kind of make us believe that the one family did. When the boy asks if he should draw for his mother, Watson, I think. And yet here they are on lottery day, still gathering, still coming together as a family unit. I'd say our only guess would be that they go back to being a strong family unit afterwards, as weird as that sounds. Definitely a lot of focus placed on family and how you know, sometimes those familial bonds aren't strong enough to keep us together and to get us to stand up and do what's right. That the pressure to blindly follow tradition and not upset the apple cart is stronger than the family bond. A lot of emphasis is placed on family structure too, which I think, you know, the family structure sort of mirrors the lottery structure. You know, a lot of, the lottery is about authority and tradition, and it is really messed up. The family structure is also about authority and tradition. You know, is it equally messed up? It just seems like there's some, things we're supposed to question about family when you read this story. Definitely one of the things. I think the biggest theme, though, the most important thing, is the theme of tradition, right? Lottery is tradition. It's seemingly a very important tradition, but does anyone really know why it's important? No one really knows when it began. No one really knows if or when it will ever end. And that not knowing makes the tradition even more powerful, because no one can even think to question or defy, or to stand up and say this doesn't seem right. Why are we still doing this? Right? Because, and despite knowing how the lottery will end each year, these otherwise happy, normal people are willing every year to partake in murder rather than question the tradition, right? So this, just saying, well, that's how it's always been done. Everyone accepts it. But just because that's how it's always been done, does that mean that's the way we should continue to do things? Right? Okay, like we kill one of our own every year. Why? Oh, good crops and stuff. Are you sure? Well, it's just the way we do it. It's always been done. Every year, every June. Oh, okay, but does that mean we should keep doing it? They don't. Everyone just accepts that this is the way it should be done because it's the way it's always been done. So it kind of begs the question, are there other things in our society, in our cultures, that are like this? Not necessarily with the end result of murder, but, are there any national traditions, cultural traditions, societal traditions, or even just family traditions that people don't question, that the tradition just continues year after year because that's the way it's always been done, and no one thinks to question it or is too scared to question it, feels too pressured to just follow along. Now, some of these traditions that you might be thinking about, they might be very, harmless things, right? Okay, yeah, my family has a tradition that we do every year at Christmas time. I really don't know why we do it. It just is what it is. Just that's the way it's always been. But is it really harming anything? Probably not. So is it as important in those instances to stand up and question it? Not necessarily, but I do think it gives us practice if we, in those small moments that don't seem to be really a big deal, is it is it okay to go ahead and question it? Even if the your aim isn't necessarily to change it. You might not necessarily be trying to say, why do we do it this way every year? We should do it this way instead. You might be perfectly fine with the way it's done. You might like the tradition, but is it still possibly worth asking, thinking about it? Why is this our tradition? Why do we do it this way every year? Because you might be surprised that you unearth some things about your family that you hadn't really thought about before. Maybe things you didn't even know. Maybe you have to ask parents and grandparents, why do we do it this way? And it could be that, maybe the tradition started out of convenience. Maybe the tradition started because the family didn't have a lot of money at that time, or didn't have a big house at that time, or you know, lived in the country at that time. Like it, and so the tradition started out of convenience and necessity, and then just grew from there. And now it's just something more sentimental with no real reason behind it other than that sentimentality. But it's interesting to get to the root of a tradition, not necessarily because you want to change it, but just to understand it. But are there any traditions, anything that we go along with nationally, culturally, socially, familially, that could be harmful in some way, that maybe aren't the best traditions to stick to, and yet nobody is strong enough to stand up and try to change it? I think we are supposed to question tradition heavily in Jackson's eyes. Shirley Jackson is really saying to us, check your traditions. Check yourself. Are there any that you blindly follow? Because blindly following tradition is never a good thing. It might not end with someone getting stoned to death, but it could still be harmful. Tradition. Okay, so we're on route. All right. So even though it's a pretty short story, it's very deceptively shocking and surprising, but it definitely, that structure, the point of view, the setting and the atmosphere, the imagery and the symbolism, they all work together to sort of highlight these two themes. And and I do think family is one of the themes. There's definitely some important things being noted about family, but the big one is tradition. Question tradition, at least for yourself, even if you do nothing about it. Again, not all traditions are harmful or bad, but it's always good to understand why you're going along with something. Be informed, right? Okay, that's it for the lottery. If you have questions, any part of the story you still don't understand, anything that I said that you aren't quite sure of as well, definitely reach out. I want to make sure that everyone has a full understanding of the story and those elements and the themes before we get to the short stories exam in week 10. So definitely reach out if you need to chat with me about it. Otherwise, you are free to go ahead and move on.